It's 2025 and a new year means brand new opportunities. And for a lot of you out there, I know you've been thinking about one thing over the holidays, and that is starting your own business. But you have so many questions like, how do I get started? How do I come up with a brand? How do I even sell stuff to people? And what am I even going to sell? Now take a deep breath. Shopify has got you. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. And you can get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. You don't have to be a coding nerd or a design geek to get this done. All you need to do is drag and drop. Shopify also helps with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, so you can focus on the important stuff, like growing your business. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/truecrime, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/truecrime to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/truecrime.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my winning co-host, Brett.
Hello, Alice. It's always winning to be with you.
Get that, Brett? Because we're going to be talking about an auction today. Did you like how I did the winning?
I loved it. Yeah, auction's a little different from our normal horrible blood and terror and missing persons cases, so I'm excited.
Honestly, it's probably a little more accessible because all of us have probably bought something or participated in. I do online. I remember when eBay was like really big. I remember in college, I would like bid on all my textbooks on eBay and like sit there and refresh to see if I won it. I probably should have just bought them outright because I wasted so much time trying to see if I won bids.
Yeah, and by the time the auction's over, it's always like the price you would have just bought it at.
Because you know what? The market works. The market works.
Yeah, that's the problem. The market's pretty good at selecting a price, so it's hard to get a good one. Now, I'll say this. I have never done like an on TV, hold up a, touch your nose, pull your ear, whatever thing, auction, like a live auction. I've never done that. Have you ever done one of those?
No. I'm trying to think. No. But what? Because like I don't have enough money to buy like antique art and stuff.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I guess this is a little bit out of our, area of expertise, but that's okay.
I will say this though. So I clerked for a judge who did collect antique furniture, antique art, and we would go to auctions with him, and it was thrilling because I could not understand the numbers, and I would absolutely be that person if I had a card to bid on that I would raise my hand at the wrong time and end up buying like a $3 million Monet, and they'll be like, sold to the lady in red, and I'll be like, that's me. I don't have $3 million.
Yeah. Well, it turns out sometimes, Alice, when you don't have the money, you just don't pay, and it's okay.
What? That doesn't sound right.
Yeah, that's actually not how it's supposed to work.
Tell me more about this, because I want to sign up for that.
Yeah, that's the best kind of auction. You get to win. You get the thrill of winning without the cost of actually paying for the items, which typically auctions take steps to prevent that from happening, but not always.
Wow. Let's talk about the Flatiron auction, Brett, because I think our listeners will appreciate something a little bit out of the ordinary. Even if you don't know what we're talking about, you have probably seen this famous building, which is an American icon. And recently, things got weird with this famous building. The Flatiron Building is one of the most iconic buildings in New York City. Go take a look at a picture of it, because when I first heard about it, I was like, I don't know what this building is. But once I saw it, I absolutely knew it. It comes on every movie, when they pan New York City, because it's such a distinct building. But the building sits at the conjunction of Broadway and Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, which you can imagine is quite the desirable location, or would be, were it not for East 22nd Street hitting Fifth Avenue at the exact same point. These three intersecting streets result in a strange piece of triangular land. Not exactly the ideal spot for a building, but New York being New York in 1902, investors decided to turn that little spot into a skyscraper, but not before some weirdness happened.
And Alice mentioned how you probably have seen this. If you guys are fans of the Spider-Man movies, the building's actually used in the Spider movies as the home of the Daily Bugle, which is like the newspaper in the Spider-Man movies. So if you've seen the Spider-Man movies, you've definitely seen it. But like Alice said, it comes up all the time. So chances are you have probably seen this building before. It's a really interesting piece of architecture. And it's one of those things that when you see it, you just kind of want to stare at it because you're like, how does that work exactly? Like, how do they fit people in parts of that building? Are there parts of that building that they just don't put people in? And when you see if you have a chance to go look at the floor plan, it's kind of funny the way the building is arranged so that they can make use of all the space, even though it is this strange triangle of a building. It's not normally, hey, build a building, and there are very few buildings like it in the world, but it is an iconic piece of New York City, one of those defining parts of the city. Now, when this building was built, 1902, the spot had been owned by a man named Amos Eno, and he was a guy who owned a bunch of land in Manhattan back in the day. It's kind of funny. You think about the various people over the years who probably owned land and sold it for nothing, and now it's worth like hundreds of millions of dollars. Amos Eno's, his holdings at the height of them, if he was still alive today and still had that same property, there's no telling how much money it'd be worth. But he had a lot of land in Manhattan, and he was notorious for refusing to sell it. So people would often offer him money for his property, but he didn't want to sell it. He wanted to hang on to it. But when he died in 1899, he had a lot of debts. He had some taxes he had to pay, and so his assets were actually liquidated to pay those debts. And for the first time of two, we're going to talk about the second time later, this spot of land went up for auction. And it's kind of funny. There's so much history here. One piece of sort of humorous shenanigans about this property is the New York State Assembly actually appropriated $3 million to buy this spot of land, which this is 1902. That was a lot of money. It's not a lot of money now. It's a lot of money now, but back then, that was a lot of money. And so they were going to buy this property, but then an investigative journalist was like, that seems like a lot of money for a little piece of triangular land in Manhattan. And he looked into it and actually revealed that this was all a plot by Tammany Hall, the infamous Tammany Hall. If you know anything about New York City, you know that Tammany Hall at one time sort of ran the town, and it was this sort of grift factory, and they would make money through various forms of public corruption. And this was going to be part of it. They were going to pay $3 million for this land, but a big chunk of that money was going to go to Tammany Hall. And so they essentially facilitated the sale to the owner of the property for the $3 million with the agreement that some of that money was coming back on the back end to Tammany Hall. So this was figured out, and rather than, arrest everybody involved and put them in prison, they just decided, hey, we're not going to do that anymore. So with the government out of the picture, it actually fell to Enos's own son, William, who purchased it for $690,000, which is a lot less than $3 million. So you can imagine the amount of graft that was going to go on in this auction if it had gone through. So he gets it for $690,000, and this is a foreshadowing of what is to come. After that, he wasn't as stuck on holding on to this property as his father was, and he actually sold it only about a month later for a couple $100,000 profit. So he turned a profit really fast on this property, and it ended up changing hands several times because basically people would buy it and think, man, what a great location. We're right on Broadway. We're right on Fifth Avenue. This is amazing, but nobody could figure out what to do with it because it was this strange piece of land. You couldn't really build a lot on it, and so nobody really knew how to make money on it. So they kept selling it, and it kept kind of bouncing around, and everybody knew it was incredibly valuable, but basically impossible to use in any way unless you had a real visionary come along and do something with it.
Enter Daniel Burnham. Burnham was a legend, having designed and executed the White City at the Chicago World's Fair in 1892. Among other architectural wonders around the country, including Union Station in Washington, D.C., one of Burnham's most famous sayings was, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood and probably will not themselves be realized." People used to speak so much more eloquently, Brett.
I know. They did. I think about this a lot, actually, this "make no little plans" thing. It always stuck with me. And when we used to live in Washington, one of the buildings, I forget which one it was. But one of the buildings in downtown D.C. had this motto emblazoned on the side of it. And I always thought about Burnham whenever I walked past it.
Yes, absolutely. So with that motto in mind, he'd built the world's first skyscrapers, and he'd do the same in Manhattan in the little triangular piece of property on Fifth Avenue. And he didn't make little plans. Instead, he set out to build a 22-story building on that little property, the tallest building north of Union Square and one of the tallest buildings in the entire city. They built it using a steel superstructure, one of the first of its kind, which was then covered in terracotta tiles. And when it was finished, they called it the Fuller Building. But it would only ever be known as the Flatiron for its iconic triangular shape. It really does look like a flat iron. A very
It really
tall
does.
one.
It really does. Yeah. You guys totally got to take a look at this building if you don't know what we're talking about, because as soon as you see it, you will recognize it. Because you've never seen this building and not remember it.
And it really is kind of amazing now that I'm looking at the building. Like, you did have to be very creative to build something on it, because it looks like it's impossible to put anything on that. And it's really like, I mean, look around it. It looks like if it leaned one way, it would fall onto the street.
Yeah, and it's funny because that leading edge that you sort of look at with the windows, it's like, what could you put there? There can't be anything. You can't put anything there. But I'm telling you, Google the floor plans and it'll show you sort of the way the rooms were designed. And there was so much thought that went into this because you had to maximize the space. It's not a lot of space. Even though it's 22 stories tall, it's much smaller square footage wise than a lot of buildings because of the footprint.
Because of geometry.
So the people who were going to use it, exactly, because of geometry. And so the people who were going to use it had to be really thoughtful. It was one of the first buildings, had an elevator. It was actually a water run elevator. It was run through hydraulic pressure, and the pipes were always bursting and flooding the building, which was a problem. But as Alice said, it does look like it could just fall over. And this actually was something people were afraid of at the time. When it was first built, people were not sure what to make of this building. And some of them actually called it Burnham's Folly because they were absolutely convinced that the next time a strong wind came down, this building was going to collapse to the ground in no time. And this was not exactly a legitimate fear engineering-wise, but it was 100% true that the building created these almost like cyclonic winds that would kind of swirl around it. And even though in the end the building didn't fall down, the only people who had anything to fear were actually young women. And this was a real problem around the building, is because they would walk by the building and their skirts would fly up. And this was obviously, early 1900s New York.
Burnham, I feel like Burnham did this on purpose. You Burnham, you little wench, you.
And they said that the police officers were expressly told to watch out for like peeping toms in this area, because people would camp out around the Flatiron Building in the hopes that this would happen. So, it's kind of funny to think about. But
you literally can't make this stuff up.
I know.
It's amazing. Everything about this building is amazing.
And it just goes to show you that people have always been creepy. So if you think people only got creepy when the internet came along, you're wrong. They've always been creepy. And it was true. The winds were so strong that at times they would shatter windows around the building. And property owners around the Flatiron Building would regularly sue the owners of the building for damages caused to their shops by gusts of wind that were blowing around this building, which is an interesting sort of civil law question as it is. How much liability do the owners of a building have for effects like that, like the wind? So this was a problem, but it didn't take long for people to become very enamored with this building, and it quickly became an iconic symbol of New York. As we said, it's been in countless movies and other depictions of the city. Most famously, Spider-Man's a pretty famous one. It's been in a ton of movies. The entire area of this section of Manhattan is now called the Flatiron District. So if you ever lived in the Flatiron District, now you know why it's called that. And the Flatiron Building is in the National Registry of Places. It's protected by all sorts of laws. You can't do anything to it without some agreement by somebody. This building will stand as long as New York City is there. So you might think, well, at this point, sort of the old gray lady of New York City, whatever history it had is probably in the past, and now it won't be quite as interesting. But you would be wrong.
We wouldn't be covering it, would we, Brett?
We would not.
So the Flatiron is owned by a number of people. Nathaniel Silverstein owns 25% of the building, and the other 75% is owned by a number of investment groups, including the Gural Group, primarily owned by Jeff Gural. In 2019, the investment groups began renovations on the building, the cost of which were expected to run to about $100 million. That's a lot of money. And the project lurched along despite disagreements right into, you guessed it, the pandemic. And it wasn't long before the owners of the property were at each other's throats. Think about if you lived in like a condo or a co-op where there's lots of people and lots of thoughts. Now multiply that by a few tens of millions. And that's what we're facing here with the Flatiron Building. The building itself sat empty and the renovations were incomplete. And this iconic property was covered in scaffolding. With no resolution in sight, the courts ordered the property to be sold at auction.
Which is also interesting that that's what it came down to. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you could talk about in this. And I'm sure if this were a real estate podcast, we would be all over this. So, you had this disagreement between all these different owners. No one's really a majority owner. This one gentleman, Silverstein, he owns probably the biggest chunk at 25%, but it just reached a point where nobody can agree. They can't agree on what they're going to do, and the only thing to do at that point is everybody sues each other, and at some point the court says, look, guys, sorry, y'all can't figure this out. We're going to liquidate the property. We're going to sell it at auction. Everybody will get their money for it based on sort of the percentage of the building you own. But this can't continue, particularly in the case when you have a historic building like this. I mean, there's a certain amount of responsibility you have when you own a building like the Flatiron. You can't just let it fall apart because you can't agree with your business partners on what you're going to do. And so we come to this auction. For the second time in the history of this property, we're going to have an auction. And property auctions are one of those bizarre artifacts of common law in this country that haven't really changed in centuries. And you'd think that when a property like the Flatiron was up for purchase, the auction would be held in some beautifully wood-paneled auction house overseen by stoic auctioneers closed to the public. I mean, whenever you see like a famous piece of art or like an incredibly rare bottle of wine or something like that, like Sotheby's is holding an auction and everybody's dressed in suits and they're drinking cocktails with their monocles and bidding on whatever. That's what you would expect. Not so. Not in this case. Instead, the Flatiron Building was auctioned in the same way as any abandoned property in Missoula, Montana might be. The public was invited to the steps of the New York County Courthouse, where at noon on March 22nd, 2023, the building would be auctioned to the highest bidder. And this really is how property auctions work all across the country, literally held on the steps of the county courthouse. An auctioneer shows up, and if people show up, somebody bids on it. If there's only one guy, guess what? He's going to win. If nobody shows up, well, I guess we'll have to do this some other time. That is literally how they do it, and that's how they did it here.
It's crazy because it just depends on who shows up. Like, you could really talk about really getting a steal. If no one showed up, it was a rainy day, and you show up and you're like the one low bidder.
Yeah. Like eBay, like we were talking about, eBay is always going to end up basically where the market dictates the price is going to be. These kind of things, if you're Johnny on the spot and you realize the property's coming up and you show up, you can get some stuff for a pretty good deal. Now, obviously, everybody knew the Flatiron was going to go up for sale, and so this was covered by the media, and you knew people were going to show up. But in the end, only 11 people were there representing various investment groups who wanted to bid on this property. This included Jeff Gural, who was the leader of that Gural investment group that owned part of the building and was really interested in owning the whole thing and being able to take advantage of the property and really turn it into a profitable venture. And he was by far the most serious person there, a major player in New York real estate, owns real estate all over the city, and he was fully expected to purchase the building. That's what everybody thought was going to happen. No big deal. We're going to go to the auction. That's what's going to happen. And he figured he'd get it for not much more than the $50 million where the bidding was to commence. So the initial bid for this building was $50 million. The value of this building had fallen a lot since the pandemic. There were all these renovations somebody was going to have to do, $100 million of renovations. So you're going to get this building at kind of a steal. Remember, not a lot of actual square footage in this building because of how weird it is, but a building you want to own, and the kind of building that would also be a status symbol for a big property owner like Gural. So he bids $50 million, and then the bidding has started, and the process is it's gradually rising as different bidders bid, and then, they drop out until finally there were only two people left. Gural, who everybody knew and everybody thought would win, and then another random guy that no one had ever heard of, Jacob Garlick. But what Garlick lacked in notoriety and fame, he made up for in commitment. Every time Gural would bid, Garlick would raise him $2 million. After 40 minutes, the bidding ended, and the final price wasn't anywhere near $50 million. And the winner wasn't Jeff Gural. Garlick had won the bidding at $190 million. He fell to the ground in tears while Gural was left standing in shock.
And what a shock. Garlick told reporters that it would be his life's mission to preserve its integrity forever. And then Garlick seemed to just drop off the face of the earth. A down payment of 10% was due 2 days after the bidding closed. According to The Real Deal, a New York real estate publication, the auction had a fatal flaw. Although most big auctions required proof of ability to pay and even a payment to enter before bidding begins, the auction for the Flatiron Building was a true egalitarian affair. Anyone could bid, and no proof of income or assets was necessary. And after the 2 days came and the 2 days went, no $19 million payment showed up.
Now, Garlick's attorneys, they were like, oh, this is just a simple snafu. You know how money is these days. It's so hard to get it from one place to another, and it's tied up. Went to this one bank, went to another bank, and it'll be there eventually. Don't worry, we just need another day. And so everybody's like, okay. So that day came, and that day went, and once again, no money shows up. And then, in sort of a cheeky thing, I think it's cheeky at least, on March 30th, the auctioneers gave Gural the option to purchase the building, but he had to purchase it for his final bid of $189.5 million. And as you can imagine, Gural, who at this point was convinced the whole thing had been a fraud, declined to take that offer.
So you can imagine, people began to look into Garlick's past. Garlick was the head of something called Abraham Trust, which is based in Northern Virginia according to its minimalist website. The venture capital firm was about as well known in investment circles as Garlick had been in New York real estate, which is to say, not at all. Despite claiming investments in the $30 billion range, the only investment Real Deal could find was its participation in a $2.5 million investment in something called Fit Fighter, a weightlifting product most famous for its appearance on Shark Tank. Are you beginning to see what we're seeing? The emperor has no clothes.
Yes. And Gural was very irritated at this point. He cared a lot. I think it's if you follow this saga and if you've read any of these stories, it's pretty obvious that this guy who has a lot of money, he's a big real estate guy in New York, but he actually really cares about this building. Like, he wants this building to sort of be the iconic building it always has been. He doesn't want it sitting empty. He doesn't want it with scaffolding all around it. He wants to buy the building and turn it into something. Doesn't mean he's going to throw his money away on it to the tune of $189.5 million, but he wanted to buy the building for a fair price. And he saw this as sort of the ultimate betrayal about what had happened. So he and his attorneys are now suing Garlick, claiming that he never intended to pay for the building. It's a little unclear what his motives are. Some have speculated that this was all sort of a publicity stunt to get Abraham Trust out in the news, which it certainly has done. A lot more people have heard of Abraham Trust than they had before this. Not sure that it's the kind of publicity you want when the whole point is to get people to trust you with their money, but nevertheless, people now know what it is. Others believe it's a little bit more nefarious and that Garlick was there on behalf of Nathaniel Silverstein, who we mentioned earlier. Garlick at some point said something along the lines that he was a distant relative of Silverstein. A little unclear what's going on there. either way, Silverstein, he's not listed in this lawsuit, and it's not clear what his motives would be, whether it would be to just muck up the auction entirely because he's irritated at everybody else that he initially was in business with, or maybe sort of drive the price up so he would receive more money, and then, you know, you have Garlick who bid too much, so if he just let it go at $189 million, everything would have been great, but he had to bid $190 million. As of yet, there's no proof to support that Silverstein had anything to do with this, and he's not named in the lawsuit, and it remains sort of a mystery what Garlick was doing and why he decided to show up at this auction and then just ruin everything.
I mean, this sounds like some shenanigans out of 1902, not in 2023. But as you can imagine, so what happened? Well, the Flatiron Building is still in limbo, and a new auction is scheduled for May 23rd of this year. And this time, they learned from their past mistakes. A winning bidder must have $100,000 to put down on the spot. Now, honestly, that's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of New York real estate auctions, but I guess at least it's something, because I bet you Garlick didn't even have, $100,000 to put down on the spot. So I'm surprised they didn't go higher, to be honest, Brett, that you had to maybe show proof of ability to pay or something like that. But I think a lot more eyes are going to be on this May 23rd auction, and maybe some more bidders. Who knows?
I would think, look, the next auction I run will be the first auction that I've ran. But if you're going to start the bidding at $50 million and you're going to require a 10% down deposit be paid within 2 days, maybe have somebody show up with proof that they have $5 million. At least $5 million, so at least they can pay the down payment if the minimum bid is the bid that gets the building. Yeah, I don't think there's that many people who are going to throw $100,000 down just to muck things up the way Garlick did the first time. But I can still imagine that is not a lot of money. And it's kind of funny. You think about lawsuits, and Alice is a civil lawyer now. And you have these people suing Garlick. I'm not sure exactly what the cause of action is. I guess sort of a torturous interference type claim. But if he shows up to bid on the auction, are the victims the auctioneer, or the auctioners who did not win? Or is it the auctioneer? Or is it the investment group that owned the building? What are the damages? They're going to do the auction again. I kind of feel like this is almost not a victimless crime, because obviously there were a lot of problems here, but I'm not sure that they're actually going to be able to get Garlick for anything. If they're not going to make him buy the building because he can't pay for it, then I don't really know what their remedy would be in a courtroom. I don't know, Alice, if you have any thoughts on that as we sort of wrap things up, but I don't know. It's kind of, to me, it's just sort of a funny event. Unfortunate, obviously, for the bidders, but humorous for the rest of us.
Yeah, I think that's right. The whole thing was set up to kind of fail, to be honest. And so I don't know what your remedy would be. You're just going to have to bite the bullet and see if you can get the next person to buy, and just recognize that this could happen in any auction. It just obviously does not happen often. And I don't know, maybe Garlick is just setting up his made-for-TV movie. And everyone's going to watch it because they know what the Flatiron is.
There you go. See, this would be a good documentary in the style of the Fyre Fest Fiasco type thing. I would watch. Maybe I'm a nerd, but I would definitely watch something on this and how this all went down. I think could be pretty funny if done correctly. So if any of you out there are, making documentaries for Netflix, pick this one up and have Alice and I on to make funny comments about it as it goes forward. But
we could even make it a mockumentary. Anyway. We'll show up at the May 23rd auction and we'll bid.
There you go. If all of you listening will pool our money, we'll put $100,000 down on, and we'll see if we can own the Flatiron Building.
All for the sake of podcast research.
There you go. We can write off on our taxes.
There you go. I don't know about that. IRS lawyers, don't listen to that. We're just kidding. With that said, Brett, do you have anything else to add before we sign off for the day?
No, just once again, I hope everybody out there learned. Have a down payment. Got to put a down payment down. Can't just have anybody showing up to your auction.
Actually, it's the opposite. I wouldn't say have a down payment to pay. It's if you're going to sell something, make sure you have a down payment for the person who's buying something from you, or you could be left with something you don't want and a promise to pay that will never be fulfilled. Good lessons on a Friday, Brett.
Absolutely.
Well, I think the real MVP for this particular episode would be my baby, who woke up halfway through us recording. And she is a podcast pro because I just picked her up, stuck a pacifier in her mouth, and she's currently, I'm sitting in a dark room. Now it's like pitch black here except for my computer. And she fell back asleep, and this episode is courtesy of her sleeping. Thank you, baby.
There you go. Everybody who was sick of there only being two of us. Now we have a three-person podcast.
That's right. Females unite. Okay. Well, with that said, Brett, it is always a joy. I love nerding out with you on all topics, and especially this one. I learned something new today. Hope you guys did as well. Tell us what you think. Email us at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Check us out on Twitter at prosecutorspod, on Facebook, on Instagram, and also check out our gallery Facebook fan run page if you want to discuss more of these topics. And until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. And until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Nope. And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
You're always messing up the name, Alice.
I just can't remember what podcast we're doing. We just have so many podcasts, I can't remember which one we're doing.
Let me preface this, Jason. I have a baby strapped to my chest, so sorry. And I'm sorry you got all that slack on the gallery about, my problems. None of your problems, Jason. You're the bomb.
And I'm using this new microphone, so we'll see how it works.
All
Hopefully
right.
it sounds okay.
I'm sure it sounds
Okay.
great.
You ready?